All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. So as Martha mentioned, I am a historian by training, but I've worked for the last couple of years with implementing mapping in a whole variety of classrooms, mostly across the humanities. So I worked for a long time with Shauna and Melinda, who presented earlier. So what I'm going to talk about today is actually a variation on the story map assignments that Shauna and Melinda were talking about. And this is assignments using the program Survey 123, which is closely tied to ArcGIS Online and story maps. So, and I'm going to focus specifically on an assignment that I did in my home discipline of ancient history. In this case, it is in Greek history. I specialize in Roman, but close enough. So I'll just jump right in. Well, why would we want to map ancient history? Well, the human geography of the ancient world is very different than our own. When we approach the study of ancient history, we must familiarize ourselves with cities and regions that feel almost foreign to our modern world. On top of this, the process of actively mapping ancient peoples, places, and events reveals gaps in our knowledge about the past, but also new patterns that we may not see if we stick only to text as they're written. So, this last spring, I helped facilitate a mapping assignment in a Greek history class that I was the TA for. So in this assignment, students used Survey 123 for ArcGIS to map locations over the course of the semester that contributed to a series of collaborative maps showing different episodes of Greek history. And here on this map, you'll see all the points that the students generated, over 300 of them, over the course of the semester. Now, these maps were used in class to explore major course themes and formed a major component even of their final exam. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss this assignment and the maps it produced in depth. We're going to cover the assignment structures and goals, examples of some of the assignment entries and the maps they produced, and we'll look at how these maps led to new transformative conclusions about the ancient past and how it is visualized. So to start, the goals that me and the main instructor set out for this assignment were, on the most basic level, to teach students the geography of ancient Greece. It's a very different world, so we wanted to familiarize them with some of the places that they were going to encounter in the course. But more than that, we also wanted them to experience the challenge of ancient mapping. Most of these places, we don't necessarily, a lot of these places can be challenging to map because place names change, there's spelling differences, there's disputes over where that location actually is. In a lot of locations, we actually have no clue where they really are, and it's a guessing game. So the other main part that we wanted to get at was we wanted the students to collectively create a data set of ancient places, because a lot of these places aren't really mapped. There are data sets out there, but not a lot for these specific topics. So we wanted students to sort of see what they could produce as a whole class instead of on their own when they went to map these historic places. So for the assignment itself, the students had 7 different entries over the course of the semester, which added up to about 10% of their final grade. And for each entry, the students were assigned specific places to map. This was just on a randomized Google sheet where we put their names next to places. And then once they found out what places they were going to map, they would do a little bit of research on them and then fill out a survey in Survey 123 that I had created. And this survey was very easy to fill out. The students just answered a series of relevant questions and then had to place a point on a map. Now we gave them various resources that would help them with locating these ancient places. And then they would also do some research through other sources that we gave them through the library. And the result was a series of maps that I then put into a story map. So using the data generated from Survey 123, I took those layers and made a unique story map for each one of the entries and then put it into this sort of master story map. So let's turn to an example of one of these entries, one of the specific assignments. So the one I want to talk about right now is this one on Homer's catalog of ships. So I don't know if any of you have probably read the Iliad. If you've read any ancient Greek literature, it's probably either the Iliad or the Odyssey. And in the Iliad, there's this notoriously boring passage called the Catalog of Ships, which literally just hundreds of lines of listing the places from which the different soldiers who fought in the Trojan War came from and how many ships they brought to the Trojan War. Most students just skim right over this. It doesn't really mean a lot to them, this big list of names and places. So we thought, what would happen if we made the students actually map these and sort of see this imagined geography of Greece that Homer is writing about? So if we hop into the map app itself, you'll see here, and go to the tab for Homer's Greece, this is the specific story map I made. This is an example of pottery from Homer's time, which I then actually tried to match with the base map that forms the back of this map. I got a little carried away with that, with making the custom base maps, but it was very fun for me as an ancient historian. So in this, you'll see all of those locations the students mapped, indicated by these ships. And if you click on a specific one, it'll tell you a little bit of information that the student wrote about it, the specific region it's supposed to be in, and then also the sources that they're getting this from, including the lines from Homer and the number of ships recorded for that place. So you can see how this map is a lot more meaningful than that lengthy passage of Homer, when they can see all these places that are listed out. And the other cool thing about this is with those numbers of ships, we were sort of able to estimate which areas brought more ships than others, and hence which regions are considered more important to the Trojan War effort in Homer's work. And the other thing we were able to do with this was compare it to a previous map that was produced in their first entry. And in this one, they mapped the sort of archaeologically confirmed spots for the period of the Trojan War, where we know that there was major Greek settlements. And this white map's a little clunky, but you can kind of get an idea of which places the settlements are concentrated as archaeologically confirmed and which ones are there sort of in Homer. The most notable difference is this area up kind of in the north of Greece, known as Thessaly, basically has very little surviving archaeological evidence, but when they mapped this, they saw that there was tons of cities described by Homer up there. So they saw a big disparity between the places that Homer is claiming were kind of part of this Greek effort and which ones have been archaeologically confirmed. So some interesting conclusions came out of this collective data set. The next example that I want to talk about was our attempt to map Athenian democracy. So just a little bit of background. I'll try not to bore you with too much history, but in 508 BCE, Athens instituted a new set of democratic reforms that essentially broke up the different political parties that had existed in Athens. And the way they did this was they divided each voting bloc into different regions and tribes that distributed political power equally across geography and social classes, so that no one specific part of the region of Athens or one specific social class had all the power. So this is how they went about that. And this here is a map from the 1980s that actually attempted to sort of reconstruct the geography of the democracy. As a historian, I've used this map a lot. I love this map, but it's almost irreadable. I mean, this thing, when you first look at it, you have no clue what's happening with all these different shapes and colors and everything. You have to read this legend very closely, and then maybe you'll understand what's going on, but probably not. So we had the students work from this as long as the Barrington Atlas, which is a very accurate atlas of all the known locations sort of the ancient world. So we had them sort of compare these and compile it into new maps showing this geography of democracy. So here, just to walk you through the sort of different visualizations of this is a chart of that system of democracy that I described, those reforms. And on its own, it's even a little confusing, these kind of different levels of divisions. But the most basic unit are these things called demes, which the students mapped here. And each deem is basically, think of it like a polling place. It's a polling place that had a single, that whatever the majority of vote there was, that was the vote of that specific deem. And then these all contributed to the Athenian assembly. So these are the deems on their own. Now let's add the layer of this geographic division. So we then see this division that was made between the city region, the sea region, or like the coastal region, and then the inland region of this region of Attica. And it's very clear now with these three different colors, you can see which ones are grouped in which. Interestingly, they don't necessarily always align to the place they actually are. Here's the heart of the city, but we still have a point way over here that's part of it. And same with the coast, some of these are more inland, and same with inland, some of them are near the coast. So we see that this doesn't actually track exactly. And then when we go to the tribes level, think of these as, there's 10 of them, and think of them as like political parties. You'll see that they're also kind of scattered all around. So this is a much more interesting visualization that 1980s map I showed you. And the cool thing about it, too, is you can click on these and get a little bit more description of what's going on. In a lot of cases, the students actually indicate whether or not they were able to find this place accurately or any challenges they ran into in the mapping process.
2-minute warning.
All right. So what were some of the takeaways of all these together? Well, one of the biggest things was that it taught students the power of visualizing history in geographic space, showing patterns and trends that would have been lost in the boring details, the lists and old school maps that I showed. And it got them to learn about places they otherwise would have never encountered or looked into, these very specific ancient locations. But it also got them to write differently. I mentioned a little bit that in the information they put in the pop-ups, it really got them to synthesize that information and to have to contextualize it in geography in a way they wouldn't if they're just writing a paper on these places. And it wasn't without its challenges. Mapping ancient stuff has all sorts of problems with accuracy of locations, finding relevant data. In my personal big beef with doing this in ArcGIS is that there's no time-enabled functionality for BCE dates, which is very frustrating when you want to make a time lapse. But overall, these assignments, we've done these kinds of things in multiple other history classes and classes in general. Shauna's doing one in a Spanish class right now. So there's really a wide application for this. And I'm happy to answer any more questions about how you might want to do this. We also, on that Story Maps website Shauna mentioned, have more resources specifically about these collaborative mapping projects. Thank you.